I was only going to drop off a package. Just a quick run to the neighbor's apartment before heading back to my own cramped studio. But somehow my morning had slowed down enough for me to notice the details that usually passed by. The sun hit the sidewalk at an angle that made dust particles float like tiny specks of gold, and I thought, for a second, about how ordinary everything looked. And yet, her door opened before I could ring the bell. She was standing there, mid-step, like she'd been about to leave the house but hadn't. The look she gave me wasn't a smile exactly, more like a soft pause, a tilt of the head that made her hair catch the light. I blinked, and she blinked too, and for a moment, I thought the air had thickened. Package, I said, holding it out like it might vanish if I didn't. Her eyes flicked down to the box, then back to me. She had this small, almost imperceptible hesitation, the kind that makes you wonder if someone is waiting for permission to be seen. I caught the way her hands folded over each other, just for a second, as if the gesture itself was enough to hold something back. "Oh, thanks," she said finally. Her voice was low, careful, like she was weighing each syllable. There was something about it that made me notice how quiet the morning had gotten. The street beyond the door seemed to shrink, the distant hum of traffic fading. I handed her the package, and she took it with those hands that lingered on the cardboard a fraction too long. She tilted it, checked the label, then looked up. Our eyes met, and I caught myself remembering the way she laughed softly the last time I'd bumped into her in the hallway, that sound tucked behind a cough. Almost embarrassed, but impossible to ignore. "I wasn't expecting anyone," she said, her fingers brushing against mine for just a moment. Quick, polite, but enough. Enough for me to feel the pulse in my own hands, the awkward rhythm of wanting to say something and saying nothing at all. I realized then that I'd been holding the package like a shield. My fingers hovered near the flap of my bag, like I might find a reason to stay. Her gaze didn't press me, but it anchored me in that small entryway, the smell of coffee from her kitchen drifting out, faint but warm. There was a pause, a quiet weight of unsaid things. I noticed her glance toward the window, then back to me, then down again at the box, and I wondered if she did that with everyone, or just when she didn't know what to do with someone she noticed. "I guess I'll leave you to it," I said finally, stepping back. My shoes scraped lightly against the wood floor. I wanted to say more, but the words tangled in my throat, curling into silence instead. She nodded. "Thanks for bringing it by," she said. And then, just as I turned to go, my phone buzzed. A message. From her. "Did you get here okay?" I froze, halfway down the hallway, and I thought about the tilt of her head, the way her hands had lingered, the soft hesitation in her voice. My chest tightened in a way I hadn't expected. The package was forgotten in my hand. My mind had nothing to say except that I wanted to go back and see her, hear her laugh again, watch her fold that napkin just so, the tiny micro-moment that already had me hooked. I stepped out of the hallway, but the street didn't feel ordinary anymore. The next time I saw her, it wasn't planned. I had come by to return a book I'd borrowed from her daughter, an old paperback she'd left on the staircase, and somehow ended up in her kitchen, the kettle whistling softly. She handed me a mug of tea, her fingers brushing mine for just a heartbeat. I thought about how deliberate that touch was, though she didn't seem to notice. The warmth seeped through my palm, and I found myself staring at the rim, imagining what she might be thinking. "You know," she said quietly, stirring sugar into her own cup, "I used to come here when I first moved in. That bookstore down the street. They always put the new releases on a little wooden stand. I'd pick one, then sit outside and watch people pass. You'd probably think it's silly." I smiled, though my chest tightened. "No, it's nice. I like imagining it." Her gaze lingered, then flicked toward the window. "It's just hard to find time for things you love when life gets busy. Kids, work." Her voice trailed, and I caught the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her hands twisted the spoon in her cup a little too long. We didn't speak for a moment. The kettle's hum had stopped. I could hear my own breathing, my fingers tapping against the mug. I wondered if she thought about the age difference. About me, about the fact that I was 20 and she, well, she was her own life, a life that didn't really intersect with mine except in these brief, fragile windows. I imagined scenarios, coming back tomorrow and finding her waiting by the door, or catching her alone in the living room, laughing at a joke that only she understood. Dangerous thoughts. I knew it. And yet, I couldn't push them away. She motioned toward a stack of papers on the counter. Could you help me sort these? I've been putting it off. Her smile was tentative, almost shy, but something in it invited me closer. We moved around each other, quiet and careful. Paper shuffled, tea sipped, small glances exchanged. I noticed how she would tilt her head when she concentrated, how her lips pursed just slightly when something amused her. Every tiny movement felt amplified, meaningful in a way that scared me. When we finished, she leaned back against the counter, brushing her hands together. "Thanks," she said softly. Her eyes met mine, held mine, and for a moment, the room felt smaller, warmer. I cleared my throat, not sure what to say, and she laughed, a short, gentle sound that seemed to echo in the quiet space. I felt a flicker of something unfamiliar in my chest, a tender ache I didn't have a name for yet. And then, almost instinctively, I reached out. My hand grazed hers as she passed me a plate. A fleeting touch, casual enough not to alarm, but deliberate enough to linger in memory. I didn't speak. She didn't speak. And somehow, that silence said everything. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I found her in the living room that afternoon, sorting through some old photographs. The sunlight streamed through the blinds, painting stripes across the carpet. I lingered by the doorway, unsure if I should announce myself. She looked up, caught my gaze, and smiled, but there was something cautious in it, a flicker that made my stomach tighten. I stepped closer anyway, heart thudding like it might give me away. "Do you want to see?" she asked, holding out a small black and white photo. Her hand trembled slightly, as if she hadn't meant to reach out to me at all. I nodded, fumbling for words. "Yeah, I mean, sure." She handed it over, and our fingers brushed, just for a moment, but long enough for me to notice how warm her skin was, how soft the pulse beneath it. I almost said something, almost leaned in, but the words stuck somewhere in my throat. "I used to come here when I needed to think," she murmured, not meeting my eyes. Before things got complicated. Complicated. I understood in a way, but part of me didn't want to. I wanted to reach across that distance, even if she pulled back, even if she wouldn't let me. There was a noise, a creak in the hallway. She stiffened, her hand dropping the photo. I froze. Her daughter appeared, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Mom? Did you see Oh? Hi." She lingered a second too long, giving me a curious look. I stepped back. "Hey, yeah, just dropping by." Her eyes flicked to mine, and in that glance, I caught the hesitation I hadn't seen before. Pulling away, she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, as if to shield herself from the quiet tension between us. We sat in silence for a while after her daughter left, the air thick with unsaid things. I sipped my coffee, watched her fingers trace the rim of her cup, caught the way her shoulders hunched slightly, like she was bracing herself. I wanted to reach for her again, wanted to say that none of this, age, circumstance, routine, mattered. But I didn't. I should probably go, I said, standing, but my body lingered near hers. She looked up at me then, really looked, like she was searching for something she couldn't name. "Yeah, okay." I leaned in slightly, just enough that our faces almost touched. Her eyes widened, then flicked down to the floor. My heart raced. I could feel her breath, small and hesitant, and I wanted to close the distance, to bridge the gap in one motion. But then she stepped back, a fraction, and smiled softly, almost apologetically. The tension hung there, electric and unresolved, like a string pulled tight. I swallowed hard. "See you soon?" I asked, my voice lower than intended. "Yeah," she whispered. And that was it. Almost something. Almost everything. The silence between us said more than words could. The evening had fallen softly, orange lights spilling over the street as I walked toward her building. I carried nothing this time. No package, no book, just a restless weight I couldn't name. She met me at the door, hands tucked into her sweater pockets, eyes scanning me like she was trying to read my thoughts before I even spoke. I noticed how the streetlight caught the edges of her hair, gold against shadow, and for a moment, I thought I might stop breathing. "Hey," I said, and my voice sounded smaller than I intended. "Hey," she replied, a slight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. There was something in the tilt of her head, a subtle tension, as if she already knew what I wanted and wasn't sure she should give it. We walked together, slowly, past the quiet benches in the park nearby. A kid's laughter echoed from the playground, distant but piercing in its normalcy. She said nothing at first, just kept her hands clasped, shoulders drawn in, walking a step ahead. I wanted to reach for her hand, but I didn't. My fingers hovered near hers, then fell back to my sides. I saw you with him yesterday, I blurted finally, jerking slightly toward a street lamp for courage. My voice cracked a little. Your friend from work? Her steps faltered. Oh, that, she said softly, eyes dropping. A pause. It's nothing. Just work talk. I wanted to believe her. I tried to. But a cold spike ran through me, jealousy that I couldn't name aloud. My chest tightened. I swallowed and looked away. Right. Work talk. I echoed, voice low, like repeating it might make it true. We found a bench and sat, the air between us thick. She fiddled with the edge of her scarf, and I noticed how nervous her fingers were, the subtle tremor as she tucked stray hair behind her ear. I wanted to say everything, about the way I thought of her, about the way my mind kept circling her smile, the tilt of her head, but the words refused to form. Instead, I said, I'm not sure if I should feel like this. But I do. Her eyes lifted then, wide and searching. Something raw passed between us in that glance, something I hadn't dared to speak before. I leaned in, almost touching her shoulder, and she didn't pull back, though her breath hitched just slightly. I started and stopped, because the world held its breath. A car passed, the sound breaking the moment, yet it didn't break the tension. I wanted her to ask, to respond, to let the silence stretch just a little longer. She blinked slowly, and I thought I saw fear, desire, and hesitation all folded into one delicate expression. The bench felt smaller, the night larger. I swallowed, tried to push the lump in my throat down, and then I realized, with sudden clarity, that if I moved, if I said one word more, nothing would ever be the same. Would she let me? I hadn't seen her in days. Not at the door, not in the hallway, not in that small blur of sunlight through her living room window. At first, I thought she was just busy, work piling up, errands, something ordinary. But then my calls went unanswered, my messages left on read. When I finally went by, I found the apartment quiet in a way that made my chest hollow. The door was slightly ajar, just enough for a sliver of the living room to show, empty. No teacup, no folded napkin, no trace of her laughter. I lingered there, fingers hovering over the frame, wondering if I should step in. I remembered the last time I'd touched her hand, the almost kiss on the bench, the way her eyes had searched mine like she wanted to say something but couldn't. Now, it felt like all that weight had been pulled out of the air, leaving just absence. Then, I heard a message ping. My phone vibrated in my pocket, but when I checked, it was just a notification from her daughter's group chat. Nothing from her. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over a blank message I wanted to send, but didn't. I remembered something she had said once, almost offhand, while we were drinking tea. Life has a way of coming back to you, even when you're not ready. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Now it felt like a warning I'd ignored. And then the twist hit me in fragments, small things I pieced together in the silence. A photo on the counter I hadn't noticed before, a child's drawing tucked behind the fridge, a name on a prescription bottle. Things that had always been there, but I hadn't seen. Her life was wider, more complicated than the moments I had glimpsed. Ex-husband, child, responsibilities she never spoke of. It wasn't a betrayal. It wasn't a shock. It was just a reminder that I had been treading in a world I didn't fully understand. The kind of reminder that pulls your feet from under you quietly, leaving your chest empty, your thoughts looping. I waited, hovering near her doorway, unsure if I even wanted to knock. Part of me hoped she'd appear, laughing, apologizing, telling me it was nothing. Another part of me knew she wouldn't. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee and sunlight, like it always had, but she wasn't there. The package I'd planned to bring sat untouched in my bag. My thumb hovered over my phone screen, but the message I wanted to send, a small, meaningless, "Hey, everything okay?" stayed unsent. I walked away, slowly, feeling the weight of her absence in every step. The door closed behind me, silently, leaving me with the echo of what almost happened, and the quiet knowledge that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't my story to finish. I returned to her building later that evening, the air thick with rain that had left the pavement glistening. My jacket was damp, shoes squeaking softly as I paused outside her door. The weight of the last few days pressed on me like a hand I couldn't shake. The door opened before I could knock. She stood there, towel in hand, hair damp from a shower or rain. I couldn't tell which. Her eyes widened slightly, then softened, and for a moment, neither of us moved. The hallway smelled faintly of soap and something warmer, familiar. "I didn't expect you," she said, voice quiet. Not nervous, not tense. Just careful. "I needed to see you," I said, and realized my words were smaller than I'd intended. I wasn't sure how long I could wait. Her eyes flicked down, then back to mine. I could see the pause, the hesitation, the invisible line she had been tracing between us for days. Her lips pressed together, as if holding back something, some confession she didn't know if she could give. We moved to the small kitchen. She poured us each a glass of water, her hands trembling slightly, and I noticed for the first time how small gestures could carry the weight of 1,000 words. I watched her, careful not to intrude, and for a moment, I thought I might dissolve in the quiet intimacy of the room. I didn't know if I should say anything, she murmured, finally, voice trailing. "But I was hoping you'd come back." Something loosened in my chest. I wanted to tell her everything, about the days I thought of her, the moments I'd replayed, the way I had imagined touching her hand again. But the words felt too much. Instead, I nodded. "I was afraid," I admitted softly. "Afraid I'd ruin whatever we have. Or whatever this could be." Her hand hovered near mine on the counter. I felt it before I dared to touch it. Brief, tentative, electric. We didn't speak, because nothing needed to be said. I watched her eyes, the flicker of relief, of recognition, of quiet hope. A soft smile broke across her face, almost apologetic, almost shy. I mirrored it, letting the tension fall away in the small, simple gesture. No grand confessions, no declarations, just acknowledgement. She squeezed my hand lightly, enough to make the warmth settle into my fingers, then let go. "Okay," she said. "Just that." "Okay," I replied, voice low, steady. And for the first time in days, maybe weeks, the world outside that kitchen didn't matter. We didn't need to rush, didn't need to define it. The smallness of the moment, the smile, the touch, the quiet, was everything. I realized then that connection wasn't always about words. It was in the pauses, the gestures, the way someone finally lets you in without a single dramatic proclamation. We stood there for a while longer, hand near hand, silence speaking for both of us. And I thought, this is enough. Weeks passed quietly after that night. Rain gave way to sun, and mornings carried the familiar hum of the street outside. I started noticing her routines again, the careful folding of napkins, the way she'd pour black coffee and watch it steam for a moment before taking a sip. And somehow, I fit into those routines, a quiet presence rather than a disruption. One morning, around 8:47 a.m., I found her on the bench outside the building, her book open but her eyes on the street. She smiled when she saw me, that soft, knowing smile, and I realized how much these small gestures had come to mean. No grand declarations, no dramatic confessions, just acknowledgement of what we had, quietly unfolding between us. We shared coffee often now, sometimes tea, sometimes just sitting silently, letting the world move around us. She'd tell me stories in fragments, trailing off mid-thought, and I'd listen, noticing her hands, the small flick of her eyes toward mine. I didn't need her to explain herself, and she didn't need me to. We were present. Occasionally, she'd pause, like she was remembering something. Maybe the bench, maybe that night in the kitchen, maybe nothing at all, and I'd catch her smile in that pause. I'd see it in her eyes before the words came. It was quiet, earned, grounded in real life, not the kind of sweeping romance from a book. We walked together sometimes, shoulders brushing, a lightness in the step that had never been there before. There was still hesitation, still moments of pause, but it no longer felt like a gap between us. It was the space where connection grew slowly, steadily. I noticed how she'd glance at her cup, coffee black, untouched sometimes, and I'd know she was thinking of me. I'd fold my napkin just like she did, and she'd notice a small twitch of amusement in her lips. These were the little things, fragments of life stitched into quiet intimacy. One afternoon, we returned to the park bench. It was empty, the sun warm, shadows falling just so across the wood. We didn't speak for a while. Our hands rested near each other, occasionally brushing, occasionally still. The city moved on around us, and we moved with it, together, without needing to label it. When I looked at her then, I realized something. The story wasn't about grand gestures or confessions or a dramatic turning point. It was about the moments we shared, the silences, the pauses, the way we finally let ourselves be present. She caught my gaze, gave a small nod, and I nodded back. That was all we needed. Later, when I thought back, I realized that the bench, the tea, the black coffee at 8:47 a.m., all of it, was ours. Not anyone else's. Not a story for anyone else. Just ours, quietly, firmly, like life had finally caught up with us. And in that quiet, I understood something only she and I could. Love doesn't have to be declared to exist. It is in the living, the noticing, the tiny acts of presence. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?